guess I'll sit down at this table. Is this what everybody does? Thank you, Michael, for the introduction, and thank you for everyone to come out on such a cold night. Michael says young architects. I'm not feeling so young anymore, but I guess architects don't really get going until they're like 45 or 50, so I'm headed in that direction. I've titled tonight's talk Loopty Loops, which is partly about the name of my practice, but also about that thing you do when you're driving and you realize that you've taken a wrong turn. It's that optimistic loop-de-loop that circles you back around towards the right direction. So this evening, the aim is to show one project in detail, which will describe the conceptual and intellectual project around questions of ordinary architecture. Of course, this is not my term, but Venturi Scott Brown's and others, in which I see myself as part of a lineage. This work on the ordinary began with a research project titled Domestic Hats and led to a series of exhibitions, models, drawings, and writings, all in an effort to kind of unpack a capital P project for my practice. And the goal is to take something that's highly conceptual and flip it into a real building. My work often begins with a question rather than a sketch. It relates directly to popular culture. It is graphic, and it takes cues from art practice. So Domestic Hats is on the left, and the architecture that it becomes is on the right, is Haus Gables, and it's located in Atlanta, Georgia. It is a conceptual project around 87 cross-laminated timber panels, 3 representational models, which I'm going to explain tonight, 1,700 square feet of glitter stucco, 10 faux finishes, and a proposal for what I'm calling a roof plan ideology, which is a suggestion of how the discipline might shift into a new spatial paradigm, which is potentially rejecting the free plan and the ROM plan of the past. As Michael mentioned, MAL is the name of the practice. It stands for Mass Architectural Loop-de-Loops. The acronym, of course, is a 20th century Americanism, which is in wide circulation. Americans love their shorthand. And this is what MAL looks like sitting in a sea of known acronyms outside of our discipline, ranging from governmental agencies and digital technology to best social media practices, OMG. And this is MAL sitting in front of, in a sea of architectural practices that also use acronyms. So Foster and Partners, or David Chipperfield Architects, who are my former employers. So MAL uses short form as a way of allowing the long form name to change from month to month, or as our architectural interests start to shift for each project. MAL is interested in an intellectual project, not a formal project, which is why a lot of our architecture tends to look differently from project to project. There's no kind of formulaic formal driver. MAL can also mean miniature angles and little lines, or maximum arches with limited liability, and we can always add the C when we're wanting to feel a little more professional. So before I introduce that body of work around ordinary architecture, I'd like to situate that work amongst my previous work. And so much of MAL's ethos places an emphasis on misbehaving in architecture, and hopefully this will be apparent in the next few slides. And so this is a cross-section of work that are either failed competition entries, gallery installations, publications, temporary experiments in the public realm. And I would say these are kind of our best practices as a kind of top 10. So in no particular order, number 1, flood a gallery on Hollywood Boulevard. So this is a project where I ask guest at the installation to slip on these plastic boot covers and wade into a gallery just off of the Star Walk, where the whole gallery was flooded with like, I don't know, maybe 4 inches of water. So the problem was that the boots were kind of leaking, but also the installation as a whole was leaking because it was like about one single sheet of rubber, but there must have been a hole somewhere and we couldn't find it. So this was a very fast exhibition and installation, and we pumped all the water out to Hollywood Boulevard that night. Number 2, fly 4 drones in synchronization, scanning Mises, Haus Longa, and Haus Esters. So this is a research project. It's very faint sound here. Research project where I'm thinking about the Bauhaus Centennial, which is this year. I'm thinking about Mises' use of brick, and particularly these 2 houses in Krefeld, Germany. There are 2 different clients, and the houses are sitting on 2 different properties. And the thing that's kind of, they're not twins, but the thing that's holding them together are these massive picture windows. So there's 4 drones. 2 are scanning the 2 back rear elevations, which are like the famous elevations, and they're in synchronization, and they're scanning the brick coursing all the way down to the bottom of the house. And then there's 2 other drones taking a video of the 2 drones doing the work. And I'm arguing that Mises' materiality in brick is fake, because when you look at the drawings of this house, there's a lot of steel embedded in the wall sections in order to get these like massive picture windows. And so what the 2 drones are doing is making a mesh, a digital mesh. And so we bring that back to the studio and started to think about what to do with this imprecise mesh. And so I began to question maybe the role of rendering in architectural representation at the moment. And I was interested in producing potentially bad renderings that were kind of hearkening back to when materials or bitmaps were mapped on to surfaces, and where you would see the repetition of the seam and the tiling. And so if these are the 3 ingredients, a bad mesh, a bad bitmap, and a bad bump map, these are the things that we're working with to produce a series of renderings of these rear facades, but starting to interject new materiality. And so we're exchanging Mises brick for millennial pink brick, maybe a wood grain pattern, OSB board, but we're also altering those materials' colors. And so the image of grout gets mapped on as a bump map, and so it also gets mapped on misaligned to the original mesh, and so it becomes confusing. What is the brick? And this is kind of turning into a new study on materiality, where I'm making new tiles out of ceramics. Still in process. Number 3, make a public space that is strange. This is the installation on the Rose Kennedy Greenway in downtown Boston. These are not actors. These are just people that got married and wanted to get a photograph. And then you have some people kind of climbing on the back. So this is a project about asking the question, can an architecture be a drawing? And so all of the view of this installation is all contrived from a top floor of an adjoining parking garage. And this is what things happen when you make things in the public realm. They get photographed and reinterpreted on things like Instagram. This is the sunset view. Basically, there's 11 trees and there's 11 objects, and the 11 objects were downloaded from Google 3D SketchUp Warehouse, where we're taking minimalist art sculptures, things from like Carl Andre and Donald Judd, and we're skewing them into this perfect kind of axonometric view. This is the back side of the installation. I'm using ordinary materials like vinyl siding, but they're being mapped onto the objects in various directions. So if you're sitting in your car on the off-ramp to the I-93, this is the view that you get while you're waiting to drive around. We're using EIFS, which is a synthetic stucco, and synthetic turf. And all of these things are dealing with the drawing in terms of hatch patterns and the hatching of the actual vinyl siding on the material. So basically, this is a plan view of the project. This is a perspective, which kind of looks like an axon. And then this is a true axon of the project. And it's called another axon. Number 4, install an olfactory project in the mechanical room of the Istanbul Modern Museum. This was done with a partner called Christian Stainer, and we teamed up and did a series of public art installations proposals across the U.S. Right after the recession, and used some of our work on olfaction inside the Istanbul Modern for the design biennial. So this was a space that we were given, maybe like 15 feet in a gallery. And what we did was we worked with perfumer Christoph Laudermill, and he created 2 scents that were pumped into the HVAC system of the museum. So anytime you're given a small space on a wall, you kind of have the opportunity to push back against the curators. We almost got kicked out of the biennial, but some board member thought the idea sounded funny and supported us through towards installation. Number 5, rent a green screen to convince clients of micro enterprise projects in North Miami. So this is when we were living in LA, and the cost of renting a green screen is pretty cheap. And so we made these homemade videos, which were proposing these kind of micro spaces to be built onto houses in a neighborhood north of Miami called Opalaka. And so our proposal was to kind of upstart enterprise, like recording studios, hair salons, and bicycle repairs that were both attached to the side yard, but also kind of infected the plan of the house. Number 6, throw a picnic for architecture. So this is a project where I'm interested in asking the question about how architecture might stack. How might we get away from extruded office towers into things that are chopped and cut and stacked? And so looking at a series of sandwiches for this kind of work. This is a grilled cheese sandwich. And this image was shot by Adam DeTour, who's a food photographer in Boston. And he had all these plates and platters and was ready to organize the architecture in his studio. This is a BLT. And just last summer, we, again, were interested in turning this body of work, which has really been written about and exhibited in several shows, into something that can become real. And so this is a speculative office tower called Office Stack. Couple more, 3 more. Number 7, exhibit work in U-Hauls in parking lots of major art institutions. So this is just outside of the MoCA Geffen in Los Angeles, where a group of curators called On the Road Project LA, comprised of 4 curators, asked young emerging architects in LA to exhibit work just outside of this gallery. Now, this was strategically timed. There was a big architecture show happening on the inside with people like Frank Gehry and Tom Main and Neil Denari, and we kind of like showed up and rolled out the work kind of the day of the opening. And this is the crew that was involved. Laurel Broughton on the front row and front over there. Number 8, create a discourse around architecture of the Dirty South via Guidebook. So this is a body of work I did with students at Georgia Tech in Atlanta, where we were looking at the analogy in the rap industry between East Coast intellectuals and West Coast makers, and borrowing the term from Goody Mob and Outcast, which is the Dirty South. And so we're not asking who the architects of the Dirty South are, we're asking what is the architecture of the Dirty South. Clearly this is a project on Portman. So half of the book is a part manual, architectural manual, and part of the book is a series of interviews. And so we got to speak to people like Denise Scott Brown and John Portman before he died last year. And one student had an interview with Big Gip, Cujo, and Timo, the original members of Goody Mob. And so you can get it on Amazon. I think there's a few copies left in the world. And you have to read they say in this interview why Atlanta got the Olympics in 1996, and I'll let you look that up. Number 9, question how architectural models are displayed. This was a big project in my second year of teaching at Harvard, where I was asked to be the faculty editor of our publication called Platform, which is a year-long kind of annual. It's kind of like a yearbook for the school. But I was interested in turning that editorial opportunity that came with a pretty large budget into a project. And so here I'm questioning how might we make a demonstration project for faculty and students, which is about color. And so I arranged and designed 16 still lifes with 2 student editors and myself. And again, we asked food photographer Adam Detour to come in and work with us on creating these photographs. The second reference here, beside the still life, is Barbara Caston's work from the 1980s, where she was using colored gels and throwing colored gels onto kind of still life creations in her studio. And so if I had this picture of this project, this is a project all the students work about the grid. It's kind of a little dull, but with blues and reds thrown into the scene, we can start to maybe make a projection of how color might work its way into the architectural project. So this is the book, and it's been printed in Mandarin at Tongji University Press, so we were very excited about that. Okay, the very last one, and I'll move straight into the work. Number 10, throw a pool party in LA, but with no water. 2 years ago, I was asked to be the guest editor of a magazine called Art Papers. It's a contemporary art magazine out of Atlanta that's been going since the 70s. I kind of had full editorial control, except the executive editor said it needed to be about Los Angeles and architecture and design. So I commissioned 35 contributors, writers, architects, theorists, and critics to look at how the swimming pool and other watery spaces have affected Los Angeles's design culture. And so these is a few spreads from the interior. It was designed by April Greiman, the graphic designer out of Los Angeles, who was kind of fundamental to pushing the digital in graphic design. And then this is the cover. Laurel Broughton is like all in my presentation today. This is Laurel's contribution, which is a series of drawings which she calls poodles. I always say it wrong. Poodles. And somehow April Greiman selected it to become the front and back cover material. Okay. Maybe we should take a break. I need to. Okay. To describe Haus Gables, I want to place emphasis on 3 models tonight. The first model being the massing model, the second is a dollhouse model, and the third is the one-to-one model. So ordinary architecture is often overlooked. It's a throwaway. It's the stuff that's immediately accessible but usually tossed aside. And I ask questions, what is the ordinary and why is it relevant now? And how might we flip the ordinary into a representational project? So I'm kind of terming these ordinaries the contractor's stockpile. So it's, in this case, all things pertaining to the roof. And the lingo goes like this: eaves, ridges, valleys, rakes, soffits, gables, hips, and dormers. Maybe one of the literary references might be Hawthorne's House of Seven Gables, but the hashtag is domestic hats. And if we consider the contractor as a geometrist for a moment, then it's possible to think of these piles of 2x6s and wood frame construction as the project of planar inclination. And maybe this is kind of the American version of the contemporary cathedral. In the contractor stockpile, there's endless variations of the domestic roof pitch with slopes like 3 to 12, 7 to 12, and 9 to 12. This is a really straightforward, basic catalog of roof types: shed, dormer, gable, mansard, butterfly. And they're so commonplace that we kind of overlook their spatial possibility when we think about what they can do for the interior. Current modes of construction from the contractor camp promote building vented roofs, which is on the left, yet the unvented roof allows us to have a visual connection of what's otherwise deemed attic geometry. Okay, this part's kind of painful, but I'm gonna go through it anyways. So the next 8 slides, I just want to demonstrate the obsession over the roof and these kind of close reading of banal forms. And this is like my version of or attempt at formal analysis. And I'm less concerned about the 2x6 tectonic, but now I'm trying to read these forms as exciting massing models and volumes. And so in figure 1, it demonstrates how a gable roof is covered by a hip roof. In figure 2, 2 intersected gables with offset and misaligned shed roofs. Figure 3, chamfered triple hips with asymmetrical extruded gables. Figure 4, there's an asymmetrical triple gable with a shed roof lodged in between. And all of these roof forms are also intersected with 2 perpendicular stacked gables. But then there's this singular dormer over on the side. Or is that 2 dormers instead of 1 dormer? Or did I miscount the first roof as a gable instead of a second dormer? So it kind of starts to get a little confusing as to what's primary and what's secondary. Figure 5, stacked, stretched, and clipped gables, otherwise known as the gable stack. You're going to have to do the next one, so get ready. Number 6, piggybacked hip dormer nested onto 2 bullioned gables. Intersecting gables scaled, doubled, rotated, and then stacked. And then lastly, front-facing gable with a camel-backed hip, plus a rotated gable and a mini gable bump in the back. Okay. Y'all are so serious. The research began by taking a fairly random sampling of about 50 houses in Atlanta. And so we're cutting across 8 different neighborhoods in the city, and we noticed a few tendencies about the collection. Firstly, that the roof geometries in more affluent neighborhoods, places like Virginia Highlands, were more convoluted, elaborate, and complex, while the lower socioeconomic neighborhoods, such as Old Fourth Ward, appeared to have more humble roof lines. Rendered in all white, the ordinary construction method is less present, and abstraction points us towards another potential construction method, which I'll introduce shortly. Object 21 is located in Buckhead. This is one of the most expensive cities in the neighborhoods in the city. And you can see it's like a mashup of 8 different roof types, which is required to kind of cover the floor plan of a 6,000 square foot villa. And on the extreme opposite end, of the spectrum number, object 41, is located in Cabbagetown, and it's a simple hip covering a shotgun-style house. And so this is the work from the Young Architects Forum Emerging Voices Award in 2014, and I was asked to make a solo exhibition in a 10,000 square foot gallery space, and I just got a call saying I won this award, and I was like, well, I didn't apply, and I was like, what does that mean? And then they gave me this space. So it was really a motivation to go big and produce a lot of work. And so, you know, sometimes you just put things together, but basically these are 16 large massing models measuring 3 foot by 5 foot by 3 foot in height, and then one mega massing model, which is 12 foot by 20 foot by 6 foot in height. And so in the exhibition, we're really concerned with the massing model and its potentiality for architecture. These are some of the kind of lessons absorbed and learned from making these 16 objects. We start to use distortion, rotation, incremental scaling. The intention is here to make massing models that are something we know, but the project has a new image for the house, which is dominated obviously by these roof types. Questions like what happens when an A-frame no longer produces a snug fit to adjoining gables, or when a hip roof no longer sits symmetrical to the primary volume. And so these are all 16 in top view. We produce two types of axons. One axon is looking at the roof as a single kind of razzle-dazzle surface, and the other are all the vectors required to cut the foam model in the 4-axis wire cutter. So trying to rethink the role of the massing model in architectural representation. As we know, massing models are usually small. They're usually the result of like an iterative process by the architect. They represent the schema, the diagram, or proto-architecture. They're lacking detail and often made out of a singular material. Massing models distinguish differences in a volumetric study. Let's make it slightly thinner, no, a little longer, or better yet, let's make it fatter. So these models were created as kind of an awkward size. So we scaled them up, but without any more detail. They didn't fit in the car that we were trying to transport them in. They don't fit on a client's office room table. They're intentionally inflated. They merely represent themselves, no longer the representational stand-in for something else. So then we took domestic cats out of the gallery and back into the city and dropped them off in front of the original houses as kind of yard art, and worked with a photographer, Caitlin Peterson, who had a large format camera. And so this one kind of makes a lot of sense for me because, you know, just as the plywood is being sheathed and, the wood framing is becoming a massing model, in the contractor stockpile example, domestic hatch shows up on the front porch and meets its kind of match in the overscaled model. So if the larger conceptual project can be loosely thought of working through 3 models, and the first model was concerned with representation. This second model, what we're calling the dollhouse model, is also concerned with representation, but presents alternative motives. The 2 things I'm bringing in now are materials and the possibility for a new spatial paradigm, which is the thing that I set up in the beginning, kind of trying to reject the free plan and the ROM plan. Haus Gables and the dollhouse model, we're trying to work through the roof plan. So it seems to me that this is an ideology that could start to reorganize space and start to drive the plan logic. And we can see in the plan of the first floor plan, you can't see how the roof might be affecting anything. But in the second plan, the underbelly of the roof is projected onto the space, and ridges and valleys start to make divisions. And so the roof starts to consume the plan while roof rooms discretize and dominate the plan logic. And in section, some of the roof rooms are actually hung from the larger roof form. So in this set of images, we're working at the scale of the dollhouse model, but now through digital drawings, and we're trying to spatialize what's connecting to the roof and what's not behaving with the roof. The interior materials are mapped onto each room, but without an overall logic. They're only carefully determined on a kind of room-by-room basis. And so everything you see in the dollhouse, which is represented in Baltic birch plywood, in reality are large sheets of cross-laminated timber panels. But we kind of purposely didn't cut up the dollhouse into the panels of the CLT. Instead, we cut one seam and opened it up with hinges, just as a dollhouse would kind of behave. At the 1 to 12 scale, these materials are graphic. They represent pop, and they're not what they seem. They're almost like a series of stickers. And of course, the project cited in Atlanta in the American South, with an interest in undertaking an old tradition of faux finishing. For Southerners, there's a history of not being able to afford precious materials, and with a subsequent desire of faking it. So on the left is the Southern Institute of Faux Finishing. It's a real place in Brandon, Mississippi. I have not been there. Maybe somebody here has. And on the right, shows an example of what the ambition is. So we have a porcelain bathtub, but it's decked out in kind of a faux marble painting. These is the drawings that were sent to the city for planning permission and to get a building permit, but they look kind of straightforward, but they're trying to create a 55-foot long exterior faux finish, which I'll explain in a second. The two references here are Mary Corse's paintings from the late 60s, which were the white light paintings, where she's painting with the glass beads that are in the reflective markers on roadways. And so I start working with a team to try to figure out how to make a facade with glitter in it, and these are kind of some of the tools. And so we made a series of mock-ups, which are kind of hard to photograph. But then this is the actual thing on Haus Gables already built. On the left is just at dusk without a flash, and on the right is with a flash, and so everything's kind of sparkling. And so before getting this built, I tried to describe this process that we had come up with in the studio of producing these fake white bricks with a dash finish of glitter stucco, and the subcontractors said, well, we've already done that. It's on an Arby's just down the road. Here's the example. And so I was a little disheartened that the white fake bricks was already a thing in the South. But what we did have was, I guess, the glitter part. So it's a product, it's a sticker, and here it's being installed on site. So they put the sticker on and they trowel on the very last layer, which is like, I don't know, something like 1/8 of an inch layer. And then they blow in with a hopper the glass beads. So the glass beads are coming from somebody that sells to the Department of Transportation. So it's the same materiality going on the road. Here's some of the faux finishes on the interior, several drawings. The idea is that I'm using a series of vinyls, ceramic tiles, terrazzo, but they're not, I wouldn't call them real materials. They're trying to be other things. So the terrazzo is not kind of poured in place and made like it would be in Europe. It's actually comes in a thin tile that's laid. In the bedroom area, there's kind of three materials coming together in three rooms, and all of those are an effort to look like marble, and so I'm trying to play out like three different versions of fake marble at one corner. This is the upstairs plan, and then this is the faux finishes completed and installed. So really, again, the faux has a certain geometry to it. It's different from room to room, and it's applied kind of like a sticker. Sometimes two colors and two materialities are meeting at a seam. There are different heights within the house. It's kind of acting like a wainscoting. In the bathrooms, they become sectional. So downstairs, grays on the bottom and pinks on top, and upstairs it flips. This is the kitchen, obviously. This is the terrazzo that also becomes the countertops in a larger aggregate. So we're about to move into the last model. Are you okay on time? But I thought I would say something about the site. This is the site plan. And pink is the house, obviously. The lot is 24 feet wide, so we had a setback with a variance, and so we could build 3 feet off the property line, which is an 18-foot wide house, which is the same size of like a single wide trailer or mobile home in Alabama. Seen here, if the next neighbor builds, we'd be 6 feet away. The house is located in a neighborhood that adjoins this development called the Beltline. And so literally the public access point is just at the back of the house. And so this is a path that connects 45 in-town neighborhoods, stitching the kind of city together. And so the New York Times calls it a glorified sidewalk. But really what it's doing is getting people to walk in a city where people usually don't walk. And it's kind of transforming the city. So when we went to start the project and all of the work on domestic cats for Haus Gables, it's a pair of 6 gables paired up. But the thing that we're doing is we're going above the typical contractor pitches. So most of the angles are 14 to 12, 17 to 12, and 19 to 12. And then this is the third model, which would call the one-to-one model. And so this is the animation of the construction sequence. These are all 87 panels being assembled together by that 40-ton crane on that other property. And so it was installed in 14 days with a 4-person crew. And what's interesting to me is the way in which the real construction is most definitely trying to be real and serious, but it starts to remind me of the scaled model being assembled in studio or an office. And if you kind of squint your eyes, you can kind of see pieces that are cut out of the laser cutter. They look like foam core or chipboard being folded up into the larger massing. So there are 4 engineers on the project: Hanif Kara of London, AKT. There was a group out of New Hampshire called Benson Wood. There was somebody running the numbers called Fire Tower, who specializes in mass timber engineering. And then we had an engineer in Atlanta who was designing the concrete box that the CLT box sat on top of. These are the kind of drawing set, 87 drawings, one for each panel, that describe to the installer where the panel goes. And also the engineer has mocked up the name of the screw and its angle for installation. So the screws are like I don't know, 9 to 15 inches long, and the whole thing gets screwed together with a set of screws. So the installer did not have a computer on site. He's just looking at these drawings and going by them. Yeah, this is like a mix of that. The materials coming from KLH in Austria, and so these are big 50-foot by 9-foot planks of CLT being milled, obviously, and then they go into this container, and then this container goes across the Atlantic Ocean and shows up at the port of Savannah, and then gets transferred in onto these 11 hotshot trailers that are small enough or big enough to carry some, like 11 panels at a time, but small enough to fit on the site. And so there's a coordination process of what panels come when, somehow related to the order of sequence. And these, I just wanted to show this image because it's the kind of one of many different angles and cuts. So this is there were just piles and piles of CLT arriving. The installer's like, stop the trucks, we have no more space. And we're like, we can't stop the trucks. So it was just a kind of logistics nightmare, but it all worked out somehow. This is the crane. If you look, what's it doing? Okay, there's the installer, Terry Ducat. This is the second CLT house built in the U.S. The first one was in Seattle, and the architect is named Susan Jones. And so when working on this project, she said that I should try to convince her super to come to Atlanta and put the second house together. And so this is kind of the most heroic moment. That's like one of the biggest pieces. The materials, 3-ply CLT for the exterior and interior walls. It's 5-ply for the roof panels, and it's 7-ply for the floor panels. And this is all finished product, right? So anytime there's a transfer from the shipping container to the hotshot trailer to the exact installation, whatever happens to the panel is like, that's the final interior finish. And so it's painting up now, and that's the Atlanta skyline, notably all of John Portman's towers, which have all the super atriums. This image is interesting. You can't see mine now. This image is interesting because the second gable there, if we like look straight up, is kind of in direct line with the neighbor's gable. And I think things like this happen when working on the ordinary. There's going to be coincidences like this. Yeah, so I would say this is the one-to-one model, this one image. Right after it was shot, I asked a photographer to come in and shoot the CLT in its raw state. We had about 4 hours of light before the contractor needed to start weatherproofing and putting in the windows. And so you can see like all the brackets on the floor. Those are other hardware and connections that all get covered up by the faux finishes that you saw in the final shots. Architectural photography is really important to me. This is, all photography, I guess, is important. This is me standing on a roof with the photographer Timothy Hersley out of Little Rock, Arkansas, where he's lit the whole exterior of the house right at dusk and got these like kind of dramatic images. Maybe it's more like Southern Gothic here, or maybe it's dirty South architecture, I don't know. And so this one kind of says the whole story to me, because it looks, in my eyes, like one of the domestic cats, like built one-to-one, and sitting kind of strangely in the kind of neighborhood context. Yeah, and John Portman. This is a photographer from London called Naro, and she really captured maybe potentially like the dollhouse thinking into the kind of scale figures and arrangement of furniture within the interior. And so there's two spaces that are really white in the house, and one is this kind of patio space on the second floor. Obviously the house is white, but also this garage, which is not really a garage. I kind of think of it as like a gallery. So it's super white and glossy and has some Dan Flavin light fixtures from Home Depot for about $22. Yeah, I'll just leave you with these last two images of Haus Gables, and this is the point on the exterior where the gable makes a strong profile on the north side. Thank you so much.
Questions sound good?
Sure.
I wonder about the scanning project. Is choosing Mises' house a premeditative act, or is it, yeah, of course it's choosing it a premeditative act, but do you choose it because of its false materiality and play with it? Or is it something that you discover later on? Like, what makes that project valuable to you?
This is all recorded. I hate when everything's recorded because then you can't really say what you want. So I applied for a series of grants. At the school I teach at, and they all got declined, like 3 of them. And so I said, well, I'm just going to use Mies as the material, and then I got it. So I think it had something to do with like modernism's heavy hold on the East Coast in some way, and maybe I'll clump New York into that as well. And so also my in-laws live in Krefeld, Germany, so I was trying to get over to Europe for the summer. But no, I mean, Mies, you know, obviously there's a heavy, it's just heavy. And so I was trying to be scholarly and academic and kind of look at Mies, but then I was also trying to instantly kind of throw it into maybe a more contemporary discussion on rendering, which wasn't so reverent to his plan or his elevation or whatever. What do you think?
I think it was a very interesting experiment. And I thought it might be premeditated, but then I think your reason is very valid too, because yes.
Just to be serious for a minute, I think something is happening on the subconscious where, you know, Mies is using those big picture windows, and there's steel inside, and then there's what I'm saying faux brick. Well, at the same time I'm doing the house, and, you know, now CLT can do the structural gymnastics, and we can punch big picture windows wherever we want inside the panels, and we're also doing faux brick. So I think, although it's 2 different design projects that I want to like pull out of it, there's definitely a conversation between the house in Atlanta, right? No flat roof, but big picture windows.
So could you elaborate a little bit more on what constitutes in your mind the moment of resolution? And that may be the perfect question for you, because it may be the exact wrong question, because it produces the notion that there is resolution in the first place. But given that you start with Mies, and given the kind of extraordinary emphasis on syntax and the ways in which, whether steel or brick come together, the ways that your project comes together is at once dissonant as well as highly resolved, but according to different criteria. If you could just elaborate on what constitutes the friction that makes you resist certain types of resolution, and what constitutes the motivation for the kinds of dissonances that you work with.
Yeah, I mean, particularly just right at the detail of the roof, like there's trying to be no gutters, there's trying to be no in-wall downspouts. And so everyone was having a lot of anxiety. You know, you're building this complicated roof of very thick wood. You know, it's going to leak. Like, you don't have your detail on the exterior kind of figured out. And so, I mean, maybe it was naive, but the image of the domestic hat and the foam model was just what I continue to aim for. But it's not the way in which I think Swiss architecture is made, where maybe they have the detail figured out already for a long time, like just putting two surfaces together. And as the young architect trying to work through it and find, like, naively a way to do it, but without referring straight to that, like, perfect detail. So what we did here was just take like a 2.5, 3-inch drip edge, which is, you know, more of a commercial application, and got somebody to, you know, kind of make the perimeter with that metal work. And then we're also using like things like TPO in there as one of the layers, which is just a, you know, plastic membrane that's also used on like Home Depot roof or like big box stores. So it's kind of, I'm not answering your question, Adair, because I'm getting like into
You're answering it from a technical perspective, and I don't see any problem with that. But if your project were to be syntactic or compositional, you would speak to it from a completely different perspective, as if you and I don't care about leaks anyway.
Right.
Or as if we care about leaks. Maybe we don't. But you do care about composition, and it's evident. And so I had imagined that you would speak about, I mean, the close-up of the brick that is cropped at that moment is a very self-conscious moment. Otherwise, you wouldn't have done that. And so I guess I thought you were going to talk about that moment.
Yeah, I mean, there's a managing a lot, like trying to keep the massing model in its pure form, trying not to be Swiss, trying to let bricks run into corners and not get in a big huff about it, trying to map on materials that are like, you know, 3/16 of an inch and not make it look cheap on the inside, but it kind of looks cheap. Yeah, so there's a wrestling with what's primary or what's, I mean, it's clearly because the CLT is so heavy, it's kind of winning. I mean, it takes over formally, it takes over kind of in its presence. And then the faux finishes and things are like this secondary project that are trying to push back, I think, on the larger heaviness.
I think there's an amazingly strange tension in the final building. And you call it a one-to-one model, and I think it's like, yeah, absolutely accurate. And it's not, that's not done in any slight way. The decisions that have been made at the level of detail, the level of materiality. I mean, think about it like this. This is probably the most structurally expressive building I've seen, in that the largest amount of surface area is actually the real structure, but you never read it that way. You never see it that way. You experience it in an abstract state of its massing model, and then the materials that you're bringing in heighten that. They do something so that you begin to see the ordinary in a very strange manner, and it heightens one's attention to what is ordinary. And I just see it as kind of like a fantastic and fascinating explosion of what what we assume to be the ordinary, using abstraction to reposition it in a very different manner.
Mhm.
The building floats. It doesn't even, from that back driveway, it doesn't even look like it touches the ground.
Mhm.
You can't tell how many floors there are from the windows outside. It could be 3, there could be 2, there could be 4.
Yeah.
All of that is cool.
Oh, Laurel, and then back there.
Well, first off, I'm super excited that I could come tonight because I've been dying to see all the photos of the house because the house is just amazing. But in thinking about the materials, and this issue of it being the one-to-one model, what it strikes me about the materials is the way that they are always sort of misregistered against the house itself, which I think is almost a kind of an interesting direct translation back to the dollhouse, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where when you're working with miniatures, like the velvet, you can never get velvet to scale for the sofa. It's always full scale velvet. So there's always a kind of misregistration of the of certain materials to other materials. But the way that there's a way that it could end up being a complete mess. But I think what seems really amazing is that it actually ends up very kind of elegant. It's not a question.
Thanks.
You can turn it in.
When you walk in, it is kind of a little overwhelming. There's a lot of things going on. I felt a little Frank Lloyd Wright.
We don't have tapestry for it.
Hi. So going back on the sidewalk project, I was wondering, like, what is your perception of like the High Line? Does it achieve the same transformative effect on the city?
Yeah, I mean, what I was mentioning is, you're lucky to have the High Line here, and Atlanta is trying to do a different version, but it's like just on the ground and it's just a sidewalk. But seriously, you don't walk in Atlanta when it's 105 degrees and 90% humidity, and people are kind of getting over it and walking now, and it's there's problems with the extreme of gentrification. It's changing things drastically. But what's super exciting about Atlanta is I think it's one of the cities where segregation doesn't really happen. There, everyone's mixing, and it just feels really alive and exciting. And it has to do with the Beltline. Thanks.
I have a question from the domestic hats and the Gable house, and kind of the starting inspiration of the 2x6 framing and the balloon framing of the houses. And I just think it's really interesting in the final assembly too of the construction method and the assembly. It's very it's departed greatly from the kind of original inspiration of how you do balloon framing and this type of logic. So I'm just kind of curious about your thoughts on that, coming back to it and doing the assembly, because is it just kind of the formal language that you get from all the different types of roof, or is there something about that construction method because that makes it ordinary because it's so reproducible, whereas this is a custom?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. When you see all the images I showed of 2x4s and 2x6s, and they're doing the pitches that we all know, there's this member across the bottom, and so I wanted to take that away.
Right.
And so one way to think about this is that the 2x6s are no longer studs; they're just turned and flattened and glued together, right? Because it's the same plank of wood, but they're just cross-laminated and glued together. I mean, it's a bit of a stretch, but the wood, the way we use wood to build in the U.S. is wood's always going to win, and so there's a attempt to maybe start to turn to this panel thing that's also made out of wood. So a lot of companies are coming online in the U.S. I think one in Dothan, Alabama, and there's many. Yeah, there's a lot in Canada. But here is kind of my favorite moment of the house because the roof is kind of acting like a folded plate, and that room has like a perfect gable pitch, or what kind of looks perfect. And that room is being held from the roof above. So, I don't know, it just gets exciting structurally.
It's like there's a house in the house.
Yeah.
I mean, kinda, yeah.
I had one other question. Do you know why the art piece had the paint?
I mean, I guess because, you know, I'm not inventing anything with faux. I mean, everything that we live in right now is fake. So, if I was saying Mies was doing bricks that were fake, he wasn't using them structurally, well, that's how we build everything now. So that's kind of, it's the ubiquitous situation. I mean, all of our houses have like vinyl, plastic, wood in them.
In your mind, do you consider Roman buildings fake brick or fake stone?
I haven't been studying Roman lately.
No, I'm just thinking, given that the word fake is you know, very timely in this day and age.
Yes.
I'm also trying to determine whether you actually mean to say fake, because more often than not, the majority of the tectonic systems that we've come to study in architecture are non-monolithic.
Right.
Monolithic structures are the exception to the rule. The majority of the things we've seen are composite systems.
Yep.
And you're absolutely right. The Miesian brick structure is a composite. It is working with steel and brick. And nonetheless, the brick is called to do certain duties that, let's say, a Roman brick would not have to do. But then again, the Roman brick is always, it's never revealed. It's always a kind of substrate to the stone in some way or another. And it contains the concrete, for instance. So I'm basically trying to figure out, is in your mind, is the Pantheon a concrete building? Is it a brick building, or is it a stone building?
Or is it a composite?
Well, I guess, and then where do you put Mies in that? And your, I mean, and as a consequence, given, and by the way, this is just beautiful. I'm sort of stunned by its beauty, actually. But I also wonder, so what happens when you have to, for some other reason, do a 2x4 house and do 4x8s? Does that change the rules of your game, or does that? How does that become present in the attention to surface that you so aptly and lovingly show?
Yeah, because I don't know what I would do with the 2x4 house, because you have you've got all the layers again.
Yeah. Does that bother you?
Yeah.
Why?
What do you do that's interesting? I feel like there's not.
Let me just let me play this out. Isn't it interesting to you that the balloon framing or the stud platform framing gains its veracity as a result of the plywood giving you
the sheathing?
Shear?
Yeah.
Right, and so here you have a great surface. You love surface, right? Am I right?
Yeah, I guess
You
so.
love surface.
Graphically.
Graphically. Oh, you don't want it to do structural work. That's the problem. Are you willing to rotate your 4x8s because they will still perform for you? Would you do that?
Yeah, but then you have to come up with a pattern.
Exactly.
And that's like somebody else has given me the pattern of how to cut this up. You know, like I didn't design. Well, I mean, I was involved.
All right. So let me ask you a different question. Then you're a great person to critique, absorb, or analyze the predicaments that Frank Gehry has sort of addressed over the years. You know,
Right.
When he has a kind of figurative project, how the sort of the surface of metal comes to confrontation with it, or when he's perfected the relationship between metal and figure, then the windows either cut in or pop out.
Yep.
You know, do you not find that as an extension and interest to your project in any form?
Yes, definitely. But I shouldn't have a conversation with those people. I should have a conversation with you, because you and Monica started on the 4x8 on the CNC table, and we're trying to cut sheets and figure out how to make the sheet disappear, right, in the application of the built work. And so isn't this exciting to you that now the CNC machine isn't 4x8, but it's now like 50 feet long and 9 feet? And
Totally.
this is your thing.
I am 3,000% convinced by the CLT thing.
Yeah.
But she does CLT too, and she does it in a different way. And
Okay.
what I'm simply probing is that, like, if the three of us do CLT, how do we do them differently?
Yeah.
And what theoretical or
Yeah.
intellectual priorities do we bring to them that makes those three structures different? And I'm trying to figure out, given your fascination with surface,
Yeah.
who's your audience? Not this audience. I'm saying, who are your historical audiences
Yeah.
that you are cultivating in response to, in dialogue with, and so forth?
Yeah. Not the single surface people.
Well, clearly not.
So not those guys and gals.
That's why I pushed you
Yeah,
towards
no, this is
Gary,
very
and I pushed you
helpful.
to Rome. I'm willing to push you anywhere.
Yeah, no, this is very helpful, Nadir, to like think about it. I'll take on the surface, but I gotta work on the
I can ask it in a different way. So CLT did not exist as a viable technology to build a monolithic house today. How would you go about your project? Would you invent CLT, or would you do it in another material?
go
That's
back to the
monolithic.
2x. Yeah, I guess you just sheathe it, and you sheathe it. Yeah, you build
So
your
you
own.
Go back to, now you have to answer Nadir's question.
Yeah, you just add more sandwich layers and you strengthen it, but it needs to be monolith. It needs to, the seams have to disappear, and it needs to look. You need to read the material first as a monolithic thing, I think, and to try to kill
So
the
you think
seams
stucco doesn't do that?
on the exterior. Or you're saying for the interior?
Yeah, interior, exterior.
Ah, that sounds exciting. Yeah.
Let me ask you another question now. Given that you downplay the presence of seams, we do see some seams here, but you downplay the seams on the interior. Why were you not willing to obliterate all seams on the exterior? In other words, it's still a surface, the stucco,
Yeah.
but it's, but
Little grout lines?
yeah, why are you willing to just eliminate all referentiality in the way that this succeeds to on the interior? And of course, because of the way in which the terrazzo operates, it subverts our horizon line, because it refuses the constancy of that even.
Yeah.
And so maybe I'm not trying to eliminate something on the outside, but I'm trying to eliminate the constancy of the brick as reference point, but rather work with these other devices you have which distort perception without having to lean as a crutch on the very traditional materiality that you so dislike.
Yeah, I think because the house is, it's a rectangle, so there's not much, it's really flat. It's just the sheer cutting of the domestic cat, that it's so flat that I felt like it needed something besides, say, like the Paul Smith pink wall and on Melrose. Like, it needed to be something else. So I didn't explain it, but 2 of the facades are the fake brick, and 2 are scaled. We ran out of money, so the 2 are scaled up larger brick, which are just the expansion joints. That would probably be a little disappointing to you, so I didn't show it tonight.
No.
So that when
Can we
the
start
corner.
this conversation by not presuming each other's position? No, let's just ask. I like expansion joints. I do. But I want you to like them too. Because you may gain it at every 4 and 8 feet, or you may gain it at every 35 feet.
Yeah.
I'm saying eventually it's there.
It's gonna be
And
there.
the question is, how do you sort of internalize it into your thinking,
Mhm.
which you so eloquently do in other terms anyway.
Mhm.
But I'm just trying to figure out ultimately whether the brick, it seems like I mean, if the brick operation is so important to the exterior, it could have been an operation you could have played also on the interior through other means.
Mhm. I mean,
But you
I
resist
keep
that to
saying
some degree.
sticker. It's just like, it's really, when you see the two corners meet,
Yeah,
I mean, you can't really, can I zoom in on this?
yeah.
I mean, now you're going to see all the bad stuff. I'm zooming in. Can I
Show
zoom
us
in
the
more?
bad stuff too. I mean, it's nice to see.
Well, see that downspout? I mean, that was a bit of a loss there. But, so yeah, right at the corner, you know, you see it all. Like, this is the two surfaces.
Doesn't turn.
Yeah, it doesn't turn, and there's almost no thickness. It's like 1/16 of an inch, and they're just dying out at the corner, and so it feels like a graphic instead of a material. So I guess that's what I would stake the claim on.
Have you photographed the models in front of the other houses? Have you photographed the dollhouse model
Ooh.
in front of this,
That's a good idea.
or in it?
Not
You
yet.
can zoom in from the model to the model.
Yeah, that would be good.
There's a drone shot.
A film. Yeah.
An interior drum.
Oh, one more question, and then we're.
Sure.
Yeah.
One last, maybe like, because I wanted to ask them, but since like Professor Young brought up the question of ordinary, would you prefer to make a distinction between ordinary architecture and extraordinary architecture than architecture and buildings? Because some architects have the conceptions or some constructions and buildings are not architecture. By assuming that it is architecture, you kind of play into a value into it, and then you can improve. So, or does this syntax ever matter to you in this whole discourse?
Yeah, so what's interesting to me is that when, you know, someone sees the house from the front, they kind of notice that it looks like roofs that they have on their house, but just slightly off, right? So that because of the way the gable was rotated, it kind of clips off the front house image. And so, yeah, it's super important for me that the gable is something that everyone knows and can recognize, but then I've kind of thrown it off slightly. So it's, you know, obviously the whole lecture I'm trying to talk about abstraction and misreading and misbehaving and all of those things. I mean, as soon as you say you're trying to misbehave, you're not misbehaving, so there's kind of a problem there. Or as soon as you say it's ordinary, it's not ordinary, it's extraordinary in your terms. So yeah, there's always a slight confusion and misreading of what's really being manipulated here by the architect.
Can you tell me why is there a downspout in the back where there isn't in the other crotches?
They look down this.
Valley.
I don't. There's a pecan. See that pecan tree?
Huh?
That's a pecan tree right there,
Yeah.
and it's just depositing brown pecans, and it made like it looked like coffee had just been poured down the back. The other ones, we went in and added like an additional little drip edge. And it's kind of, I don't know, we just could manage it better. There's something, I don't know if it's about the volume that's coming down on that one.
The volume of water, you mean?
Yeah, or it's the pecans.
But
I
there's
don't
also
know.
something super weird about that moment where the gables twin,
Yep.
and then it gets a downspout down the middle, so
I
that
know.
you end up looking right at the downspout intensely, which is actually even weirder than not looking at it.
Somebody told me I should have done a little geometry, but I didn't even know you could do that. So it is what it is.
It's all right.
But you like it?
I like it.
Okay. Thank you.
And any other questions?
Off the hook.
I'm wondering what the neighbors thought.
Oh, again, it's like recorded. I can't really. So y'all know The Walking Dead.
Yeah.
The producer lives right there.
Oh, that's good.
And he said, he didn't talk to me the whole time, but then I was out there with like Tim Hersley, the photographer, and he said, we're really happy about our new view and congratulations, it's beautiful. Like that guy's happy. The other guy I'm in a little bit of a fight with, but for other reasons.
Is this your house? or-
So this is self-funded. I took out a construction loan, and yeah, so took on all the risk. I mean, there's no client because I think it would be really difficult to push things, both materiality, structure. 87 panels from Austria. Nobody's calling me wanting the second CLT house in the country, especially because I'd never built one before. So yeah, it's kind of like using Portman as like a mentor in some way and trying to copy, or at a very small scale, can a typology be born out of something that doesn't have a client, where I'm taking on all the risk? Because I would argue that the super atrium in Atlanta was born out of him taking on all the risk without a client as a developer architect model.
Cool.
All right.